On the night of December 31st, 2022, 39-year-old Anna Walsh was sitting in the dining room of her home in Cohasset, Massachusetts, drinking champagne. She was a high-powered real estate executive, a mother to 3 young boys, and as she looked across the table at her husband, Brian, and a close family friend, everything seemed perfect. They spent the evening laughing, eating a fancy dinner, and talking about their plans for the new year. At one point, Anna took a red marker and wrote a quick note on the side of a champagne box. It read, "Cheers to 2023. We are the authors of our lives." By 1:30 in the morning, their friend hugged them goodbye and walked out into the freezing January air. He had no idea that he would be the last person to ever see Anna living a normal life, because less than 48 hours later, she vanished. She didn't pack a bag. She didn't kiss her kids goodbye. Her phone just went dead. Normally, when a mother of 3 suddenly disappears, her husband is frantically calling the police, begging for help. But Brian Walsh didn't call 911. He didn't tell anyone she was gone. In fact, the police only found out Anna was missing days later, when someone else entirely called them in a panic. And when investigators finally knocked on Brian's door to ask where his wife was, the story he told them was so strange and so completely full of holes that it triggered one of the most disturbing investigations in modern history. To understand how completely bizarre Anna's disappearance was, you have to look at who she was. Anna was not the type of person to just flake. She was born in Belgrade, Serbia, right before the country was torn apart by war in the 90s. In 2005, at just 22 years old, she moved to the United States with absolutely nothing but ambition. She started out scrubbing floors and making beds as a hotel maid, but she was a grinder. Over the next 15 years, she clawed her way up from the bottom, eventually becoming a top-tier regional manager for one of the biggest real estate firms in the world. She was the definition of the American dream. And then, there was her husband, Brian. Brian came from a totally different world. He grew up in a wealthy neighborhood in Boston. He was old money, educated, smooth-talking, and obsessed with high-end art. To the outside world, he looked like the perfect match for a rising star like Anna. But behind closed doors, Brian wasn't exactly the successful businessman he pretended to be. In fact, a few years before Anna vanished, Brian was busted by the FBI for trying to sell fake Andy Warhol paintings for $80,000. He was caught, convicted of federal fraud, and sentenced to 37 months in prison. So, when Brian was sitting at that fancy New Year's Eve dinner we talked about earlier, drinking champagne and smiling with his wife, he was actually wearing a police-issued GPS ankle monitor. He was on strict house arrest, just waiting to be shipped off to federal prison. Now, here's the thing about that monitor. It wasn't a real-time GPS tracker that showed the cops every move he made on a map. It was an older RF model. It only alerted the police if he left the house without permission. And Brian, he was a master at manipulating the system. He'd constantly request pre-approved windows of time to run errands or take his kids out, giving him just enough freedom to move around without raising any red flags. As you can imagine, this put a massive strain on their marriage. Anna was the sole provider. During the week, she was commuting down to Washington, D.C. for her high-stress real estate job, and on the weekends, she was flying back to Massachusetts to take care of her 3 little boys, who were just 6, 4, and 2 years old. And all the while, she had the dark cloud of her husband's impending prison sentence hanging over her head. Anna was exhausted, she was stressed, and by late 2022, she was looking for a way out. While working in D.C., Anna met a wealthy real estate broker named William. What started as a professional friendship quickly turned into a full-blown, secret romance. They went on boat trips together in D.C. and were even talking about a trip to Ireland. By December, Anna was quietly making moves to leave Brian behind and start a brand new life in Washington with William. She thought she was keeping this a total secret. She thought she was protecting herself until she was ready to make her move. But here is the terrifying part. While Anna was away in D.C., building this secret second life, Brian was stuck at home, on house arrest. He had a lot of free time, and he was getting paranoid. On Christmas Day, just 6 days before Anna vanished, Brian sat down at his computer, According to investigators, he didn't search for Christmas recipes or gifts for his kids. Instead, he typed William's name into the search bar. He knew about the other man. A few days later, Brian made another search. He typed, "What is the best state to divorce for a man?" The cracks in their picture-perfect marriage had totally shattered. Brian knew his wife was slipping away. He knew she had a new man, a new life, and was likely going to take his 3 kids with her while he rotted in a federal prison cell. And that brings us back to the morning of January 1st, 2023. The morning Anna Walsh supposedly left her home for a work emergency and was never seen again. When police finally realized she was missing, they drove out to the Walsh house to figure out exactly what happened that morning. And the story Brian told them didn't make any sense at all. By January 4th, Anna Walsh had been missing for 3 days. But remember, Brian hadn't called the police. In fact, the only reason the Cohasset Police Department even found out Anna was missing was because the head of security at her company in DC called them. Anna hadn't shown up for work. Her usually hyperactive Instagram was completely dead, and her co-workers were panicking. It was only after Anna's boss called the house looking for her that Brian finally picked up the phone and officially reported his wife missing. When detectives sat Brian down to ask him what happened, he was calm. He sounded exactly like a concerned husband who just couldn't figure out where his wife went. He told them that around 4 a.m. on New Year's Day, Anna got an urgent text about a work emergency down in Washington, D.C. He said she kissed him goodbye, called an Uber or a Lyft, and headed to Logan International Airport to catch a flight. After she left, Brian said he just went into dad mode. He made breakfast for their 3 little boys, and then, later that day, he drove to a couple of towns over to run some errands for his mother at CVS and Whole Foods. It was a very detailed, very normal-sounding story. But in a missing person case, police have to verify everything. So, they started making calls. First, they called Anna's company. They asked about the urgent New Year's Day crisis. Her co-workers were confused. "What emergency?" they said. There was no crisis. Nobody had called or texted Anna that morning. Okay, a little weird. Next, detectives contacted Uber and Lyft to track her ride to the airport. Both companies checked their databases. Neither of them had picked up anyone at the Walsh residence that morning. In fact, no cars had been dispatched to their street at all. So the police checked with JetBlue Airlines and pulled the security footage from Logan Airport. Anna never bought a ticket. She never went through security. She never got on a plane. Right off the bat, Brian's story was falling apart. But the police figured maybe he was just confused about her travel plans. Let's check his alibi. Let's look at the cameras at CVS and Whole Foods where he said he was shopping for his mom. Detectives pulled the tapes. They watched hours of footage. Brian wasn't at the CVS. He wasn't at the Whole Foods. There were no receipts. He had lied about the emergency. He had lied about the Uber. He had lied about the airport. And he had lied about where he was. So, where the hell was Brian Walsh on New Year's Day? When police expanded their search and started checking cameras at other businesses in the area, they found him, but he wasn't buying medicine for his mother. On January 1st, the exact same day, Anna supposedly vanished. Security cameras at a Lowe's hardware store in Danvers, Massachusetts, picked up a man walking through the aisles. He was wearing a black surgical face mask and thick blue rubber gloves. It was Brian. And what he was buying sent an absolute chill down the investigators' spines. He went to the self-checkout and dropped over $450 in cash. He bought mops, buckets, and a hatchet. But he also grabbed a hacksaw with extra blades, a heavy-duty Tyvek suit, and a massive amount of cleaning supplies like bleach and paint thinner. But it didn't stop there. The very next day, January 2nd, cameras caught him at a Home Depot in Rockland, loading up on even more supplies. He dropped another $450 in cash on mops, buckets, heavy-duty tarps, and over 100 pounds of baking soda. And it didn't stop there. On January 3rd, security footage from an apartment complex caught Brian pulling up to a massive industrial dumpster. You can see him on camera, visibly straining as he drags these heavy, dark trash bags out of his car. But maybe the most disturbing piece of footage came on January 4th. This was the same day Brian officially reported Anna missing. The same day, he was calling her co-workers, playing the role of the terrified, heartbroken husband. Cameras caught him at yet another Lowe's hardware store. This time, he had one of his young, toddler sons with him. He was buying a heavy-duty trash can, and as he stood in the aisle, buying a trash can while his wife was supposedly missing, Brian looked up at the security camera, casually fixed his hair, and smiled. At this point, the police knew they weren't dealing with a missing person case anymore. The husband had lied about his whereabouts, and he had spent the last 72 hours buying tools, bleach, and throwing incredibly heavy bags into random dumpsters. On January 8th, 1 week after Anna vanished, police officially arrested Brian Walsh, not for murder because they still didn't have a body, but for misleading a police investigation. They finally had him in custody, which meant they could finally get a search warrant for his house. When investigators walked through the front door of the Walsh family home, everything looked relatively normal. But then, they opened up the family's MacBook. They also grabbed an iPad that belonged to one of his little boys. When they looked at the internet browser history, they found something so chilling, it practically stopped the investigation in its tracks. The search history showed that on January 1st, starting at 4:54 in the morning, the exact time Brian claimed Anna was getting ready to leave for the airport, someone was busy typing questions into Google. I'm going to read you just a few of the things Brian Walsh searched for while his kids were sleeping down the hall. How long before a body starts to smell? How to stop a body from decomposing? Can you be charged with murder without a body? How long does someone need to be missing to inherit? By the next day, January 2nd, the searches became a lot more frantic and a lot more specific. Dismemberment and the best ways to dispose of a body. How to clean blood from wooden floor. Can you throw away body parts? Hacksaw best tool to dismember. 10 ways to dispose of a dead body if you really need to. The detectives realized they weren't looking for a missing woman who ran off with a new boyfriend. They were looking for a woman who never made it out of her house. Investigators immediately went down into the basement of the Walsh home. It didn't take long to find what Brian had been trying to hide. They found bloodstains on the floor. They found blood on the wooden stairs and smeared on a support beam. And laying nearby, they found a damaged knife with blood crusted on the blade. But Anna's body wasn't there. Police knew Brian had spent the days after New Year's driving around to random dumpsters. But trash gets picked up. By the time police realized what Brian had done, a week had already passed. It was a race against the clock. Investigators mapped out every single dumpster Brian had visited, tracked the garbage trucks that emptied them, and rushed to a massive trash transfer station in the town of Peabody. They started digging through literal tons of garbage, and eventually, they found the bags. When they opened them, it was worse than anyone could have imagined. First, they pulled out the personal items, a Prada purse, a wallet, a COVID-19 vaccine card with Anna's name printed right on it, and a pair of green boots, the exact same boots Anna was wearing the last time she was seen alive. Then, they found the tools, a hatchet, a hammer, heavy wire shears, and a hacksaw. They found a Tyvek protective suit, the kind of full-body suit someone wears to keep blood off their clothes, along with safety goggles. There were bloody slippers with human hair stuck to them. But the most horrifying discovery of all was a heavy rug. It had been violently chopped into smaller sections. It was completely saturated with blood, and when crime scene techs examined the fabric, they found a jagged piece of metal embedded deep inside the fibers. Someone had been hacking through something on top of that rug with so much force that the blade actually snapped and got lodged in the material. DNA tests confirmed the worst. The blood on the hatchet, the hacksaw, the slippers, and the rug all belonged to Anna Walsh. The DNA inside the Tyvek suit belonged to Brian. When police went back and checked the family's Volvo SUV, they found the back seats folded down with a heavy plastic liner spread across the trunk. Even though Brian had spent days scrubbing it with bleach, tests revealed hidden blood inside the car. Inside the center console, police found 16 pairs of disposable gloves. The horrifying picture was finally complete. Brian had killed his wife in their home. He went down to the basement, put on a protective suit and goggles, and used a hacksaw and a hatchet to do the unthinkable. He loaded the heavy bags into the back of the Volvo, and over the next few days, he simply threw the mother of his children into random dumpsters across Massachusetts, like literal garbage. And yet, despite all the bleach, all the planning, and all the Google searches, he had left a trail of evidence so painfully obvious that it only took the police a few days to unravel his entire life. On January 18, 2023, Brian Walsh was officially charged with the murder of his wife. He pleaded not guilty and was sent to the Norfolk County Jail to wait for his trial. He sat in that cell for nearly 3 years as the legal system dragged on. And, in September of 2025, just a few months before his trial was finally supposed to start, something crazy happened. Another inmate inside the jail actually attacked Brian with a homemade weapon and stabbed him. Brian survived, but his defense team immediately used the attack to delay the trial, claiming he was now too disoriented and anxious to help with his own defense. He was sent to a psychiatric hospital for a mental evaluation, but, eventually, the judge had enough. The trial was officially set for December 1, 2025. When the trial finally began, the prosecution came out swinging. They called 50 witnesses over the course of 8 days. They walked the jury through every single horrifying detail of Brian's timeline. The 5 a.m. Google searches, the hardware store footage, the heavy bags, the blood in the basement. They even brought in the head of security from Anna's company to testify about the bizarre phone calls Brian made, fake crying about his missing wife. But the most damaging witness of all was William Fastow. Anna's secret lover took the stand and laid it all out. He described their romantic boat trips and the plans they'd made for a future trip to Ireland together. He testified that Anna was moving toward a new life in D.C. and was stressed to the breaking point over Brian's fraud case. She was already making moves to leave Brian for good and take her 3 kids with her. This gave the prosecution the ultimate motive. Brian wasn't just a panicked husband. He was a jealous, enraged man who had secretly Googled William's name on Christmas Day. He knew his wife was leaving him, and he decided that if he couldn't have her, no one could. With a mountain of DNA evidence, surveillance footage, and a clear motive, you might think Brian's defense team would just try to get a plea deal. Instead, Brian's lawyer stood up in front of the jury and delivered a defense strategy that was so bold it was almost insulting. The defense looked at the jury and tried to spin a desperate story. They didn't outright admit he killed her, but they argued that even if Anna was dead, it wasn't murder. Their theory? Something called sudden, unexplained death. They claimed that after their friend left the party, Brian went to clean up, and when he finally crawled into bed next to Anna, she was already gone. They argued this healthy 39-year-old woman suffered a freak medical catastrophe in her sleep, and Brian, terrified of being blamed while on house arrest, just snapped and made some horrific choices. He knew the police wouldn't believe him. He knew he would lose his kids. So, instead of calling 911, he made the terrible, panicked decision to go to Lowe's, buy some saws, and dispose of the woman he loved. The lawyer looked at the jury and said, "They have no body, they have no clear cause of death, and they have no definitive murder weapon." It was a defense built entirely on missing evidence, but for it to work, the jury had to believe that Anna magically dropped dead of natural causes on the exact same night her husband decided to Google how to clean blood off a wooden floor. They had to believe that a man who searched "Can you be charged with murder without a body?" was just doing some innocent late-night research. The defense didn't call a single witness. They just hoped the jury would find enough reasonable doubt in the prosecution's story. But the prosecution had one more devastating piece of evidence to show the jury: the ultimate motive. It turned out this wasn't just about a failing marriage or a secret lover. It was about pure, unadulterated greed. During the trial, the jury learned that Anna had multiple life insurance policies, some through her company and others she'd taken out privately. Combined, the total payout was approximately $2.7 million. And the sole beneficiary of every single cent? Brian. And suddenly, one of those chilling Google searches he made on New Year's morning made sickening sense. Remember when he searched, "How long for someone to be missing to inherit?" He wasn't a panicked husband dealing with a medical emergency. He was a man waiting for a multi-million-dollar payday. The jury saw right through the defense's story. On Monday, December 15, 2025, after just a few hours of deliberation, they came back with a unanimous verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. Brian showed absolutely no emotion as the judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Brian's plan actually worked in one specific, haunting way. Her body was never found. Investigators believe the heavy garbage bags Brian was seen dragging to dumpsters were taken to the CMAS plant, a massive facility that incinerates municipal waste to generate electricity. There are no bones. There is no grave. There is nothing to send back to her grieving family in Serbia. The fire that powers someone's lights in Massachusetts likely consumed the very last physical trace of her existence. And so, Anna Walsh exists now only in the memories of those who loved her. She took a red marker and wrote, "Cheers to 2023, we are the authors of our lives." She was right about that. She just didn't get to finish writing her story.